You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast. This Lululemon sweatsuit takes softness seriously. Meet the scuba matching half zip and joggers, made in a fleecy fabric that feels smooth against your skin with a roomy fit that instantly takes the pressure off. Throw it on, and you're all set to run errands after your workout. Shop scuba sets now at Lululemon.com.
When you want your spring break to feel like... and your kids' pool day to feel like... and your hotel bed to feel like... ooh, and room service to feel like... because at Hilton, hospitality feels like...
Your cabana's ready. Would you like fresh towels?
It matters where you stay. Book now at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Thank you so much.
Join our Patreon for extra episodes, interviews, extra content, and to help support the podcast and help us continue to do the work we do.
Go to patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl to learn more.
Stop calling your sister a gnome. It's rude.
I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy.
And this is Ancient History Fangirl.
We are thrilled to welcome Ayana Gray to the podcast. Ayana is the New York Times bestselling author of Beasts of Prey, and we're here to talk to her today about her new debut adult novel, I, Medusa. I, Medusa is a look at the origins of one of mythology's most misunderstood villainesses. Welcome, Ayana. We are so happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you both for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. So what drew you to the story of Medusa?
So I have been a Greek mythology girly my whole life. It was the first mythology that I was introduced to, really Greco-Roman mythology. And, you know, I thought the heroes in Greek mythology were interesting, but I was always more interested in like what the figures that were considered the monsters or the villains in these stories. So I loved like the Minotaur and Medusa. Those were two of my favorites. And I was familiar with Medusa. I mean, we see her all over pop culture, even outside of literature. And I knew about her, you know, in this kind of vague way, like every Greek mythology person knows who she is. But I didn't know much of her backstory. And actually one day, like I was just doing a random Google search and was trying to figure out where she might have been from, like historically where she might have lived. And I found that there were no clear answers there. But there were some suggestions that she could have lived near or even on the North African continent in that region, which was really interesting to me because I'd never heard that before. And I learned that there were all these, in addition to all of this discourse about where she might have lived, there was discourse about whether she was born a monster or not, and what happened to her, and why, and who did it to her. And it made me realize, you know, that there was actually a lot of room creatively to think about what her real story was and who benefited from certain versions of her story. And it just, you know, I'm a writer, so of course all of the questions just got my mind going, and this book is the result of it.
That is so fascinating, and that's such a fascinating question to ask. Who benefits from what versions of this story? Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so one of my degrees is in political science, which just means I like to argue a lot. It just really means I like to argue a ton. But one of the things in studying political science is you're constantly sort of encouraged to think about power, who has power, who doesn't have power, who benefits from certain narratives, who benefits from calling this figure a hero or this figure a villain. And once I thought about Medusa as being anywhere near the African continent, as a person of African descent, I felt a pretty strong connection to her. And I thought about how in most stories she's dehumanized, she's a monster, we don't know much about her background, not much attention is paid to it. And I thought about who might benefit in the Greek mythology world and what storytellers might benefit from portraying a woman with snake-like hair as monstrous, as someone who's not worthy of grace or forgiveness or understanding or compassion. I obviously have locks and I've had like little children compare my locks to snakes. And there are all these theories about how maybe Medusa was a woman with locks and how could it have benefited society at that time to paint a woman with locks as a monster? And just the thing is, so many of these questions aren't answered, but I think it's really fun to think about them and pose them and get people talking. I think that's the benefit or like the hope of telling stories like this, is just getting people talking and thinking.
Yeah, and I have a question about locks and snakes for hair because I grew up, I've got very red, bushy, curly hair. And I do think that it's an interesting thing about the snakes for hair, talking about either locks, as in your locks, or just in general, women's hair and the sort of value that's been prized on different types of hair. And I just wanted to get your sort of opinion on why that transformation, particularly the snakes for hair, you think is so vital and crucial and is repeated over and over again in this myth. Like one of the things we always know is that Medusa has snakes for hair.
I think across the world, across time, we place so much value in physical beauty. And if you read about Medusa and different versions of her, really her hair is the focal point. There's no talk of whether she was meek or shy or brave or smart or clever. It's always this obsession with hair, and it's like her value is her hair. And if we go with the version of the story where Athena punishes her for some sort of relations with another god, for her punishment is taking away something that's most valued to her, and it's her hair. And for me, just because of the way I grew up as a little Black girl going to beauty shops, I saw how much value was placed on having quote unquote good hair, which good hair means different things to different people. So to me, I saw these are two different worlds. We had the ancient world, and then we have, like, for me, the contemporary world within, like, specifically Black America. Two very different worlds, but both have placed this, to me, undue level of importance on a physical thing instead of an internal attribute. And I wanted to sort of examine that and play with that. I know a lot of Black people who I've talked to or who kind of engage with me on social media have said, I've always thought Medusa's snakes were just locks that people lied and said that they were snakes and they really weren't. And it was demonized and it was just part of, it's interesting because none of these theories is like the quote unquote correct theory, but it's so interesting how people from all these different walks of life are connecting and engaging with this 2,000-year-old figure because of where they come from or their own experiences, which is the point.
It also just shows how important it is to have people telling these stories and showing these stories through their own lenses that is different from white European lens, because all the way up to the 1800s, like a lot of the time, that's where these translations are coming from.
Mm-hmm. I learned in some of my research for this book, even the idea that the statues that we think about when we think of like dark academia and classical studies, a lot of these statues were actually painted and quite colorful. They lost their paint over time and they became white. But a lot of, this sounds very tinfoil hat theory, but there were white supremacist groups who used the fact that the statues were, quote, pure white to justify white supremacy, even though archaeologists and historians have been like, these statues were not white originally. They've turned white over thousands of years. And so it was interesting because I didn't expect for racism and discussion of race to be so entrenched in classical studies. I knew it would be there, but I didn't know how fiercely people had fought to protect this idea that all ancient Greeks looked the same way, or there were no Black people in Athens, there were no brown people in Athens. That couldn't possibly happen, even though Greece is pretty close to Africa. If we look at a map, it gets pretty contentious.
Yep. You would see more brown people in Africa and Italy than most likely pasty people like me before the Roman invasion of Britain, or Germany, I suppose,
Yeah, that doesn't fit the narrative. But going back to power, like, and I'm going down a rabbit hole, but you always have to think who benefits if we tell this version of the story, who does not benefit. It's easier to pretend that like there was no civilization on the African continent until other groups of people came, and we can just ignore the ancient libraries and the ancient universities that already existed there because that's not convenient for whatever narrative is trying to be pushed. So again, you can take this conversation down a historical, academic, social path. And that's the cool thing. All of these things get to converge when you're talking about mythology and retellings.
Absolutely. And I just want to, reinforce what you said, that we see this in Roman studies a lot because we've done a lot of deep dives in this area. I do not think this is tinfoil hat at all. I think it's just facts. Some of the Roman emperors arguably could have been Black. For example, Septimius Severus, I think, was at least half North African. There were others too. We see people of all different skin colors in the paintings and like murals and things like that. Like it was diverse, like it was not just white people running around there.
And this was a really important thing that like I still struggle with it, but I had to really kind of change the way I was thinking while I was writing this book. Even saying like race was not what we know it today. So even saying like there were Black people is kind of wrong, because people with my skin complexion living in ancient Athens at this time would not have self-identified as Black. That's not to say that there were not people with my skin complexion around. There definitely were, but they were not self-identifying and categorizing and finding community, saying, you have dark skin and I have dark skin. We are of a community. Oh, you have pale skin and I have pale skin and we're going to be a community. That's not the way that people grouped themselves. And so even I'm careful about kind of how I say, oh, this person was actually white or this person was actually Black or brown, because people were much more concerned with, are you Athenian? Are you not Athenian? Are you Egyptian? Are you Nubian? Where are you from? Are you a citizen? What's your occupation?
What's your gender? That was also a real big one. And whether or not you had been enslaved or not enslaved, a freed person, a non-freed person, and how your rights worked.
Your citizenship, that was another big one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The way I try to think about it or explain it to people is like, if you can imagine a future where people say, you have a widow's peak and I have a widow's peak and therefore we're a community. And it's like, does that sound bizarre to you? Yes, it sounds bizarre to you, because we don't categorize ourselves and create community around widow's peaks or lack of widow's peaks. We just don't do that in this our modern society. And so that's, I think, how it would have been looked at by somebody in antiquity, trying to group yourself purely off of skin color and nothing else. That just wasn't how it was. And in early versions of I, Medusa, I wrote it as Medusa or Medi experiencing racism at first, and then had to walk that back and edit. And in my revisions, I actually changed it so where she experiences exclusion and she experiences negative, engagement from girls, but it's not actually because she's Black. It's because she's not Athenian and she's not part of the aristocracy. She's an outsider for other reasons, but it's actually not purely because she has brown skin and the hair texture that's different from everybody else's. They're more like, you're not Athenian. That's the focal point.
That leads nicely into another thing about Medi that I really found fascinating. I've read a lot of retellings, I said before we started the recording. And one of the things that I love about this retelling, and if this comes out before the book comes out, please go pre-order it. If it's after, go pick it out, because it's such a good retelling, is you really focus on the humanity of Medusa, of Medi, and you give her a name where I'm like, now she's a character. People have like a pet name for her. Like she exists as a human would. But the reality is she is the daughter of like the primordial goddess of monsters, and Porcus, who is the old king of the sea, or one of the sea kings, and she is the only mortal daughter. So even amongst like the gods and amongst her own family, she doesn't quite fit in, and she obviously doesn't quite fit in with the mortal world. Like, what was it like working with a character like that who essentially fundamentally doesn't fit in anywhere? And this is before she runs afoul of maybe two gods.
Yeah, I wanted to be, and I hope I wanted to be really, really intentional with every choice I made, because I have a tremendous respect for the icon that is Medusa. I realize people who know nothing about Greek mythology have seen Medusa. They see her, in Versace logos. I was trying to be really intentional about what I did with this book, and even the choice to call her Medi versus Medusa felt really important to make that distinction, because you'll notice that without giving it away, the only people who call her Medi are the people who actually love her and see her for what she is, which is a young kind of woman on the cusp of womanhood. People who call her Medusa see her sometimes as a woman, sometimes as a tool, but only people who love her call her Medi. And I wanted to make that distinction. I also wanted, if I'm telling a backstory, origin story narrative, I wanted to make it really clear that from the beginning, Medi feels isolated, Because when you think about what kinds of people, not just women, but what kinds of people tend to be targeted by predators and by manipulative people, they're looking for people who are isolated socially, people who don't have a strong support system, don't feel understood, are living in a lot of dysfunction, are sort of starving for nurture and love. And so I wanted to create that situation. It sucks because it meant that he had to have a really tough time in the beginning, but I wanted it to be understood. Like, she's not just falling for someone because they're nice to her a few times. It's also because she's literally starved for attention. No one notices the mortal girl amidst all the beautiful gods. And that's how she has felt her entire life. And so when someone finally does give her that attention that she desperately wants and sees her and makes her feel valued and safe, it helps create this trust that later leads to other things. So I wanted that to feel earned in a way. Like, it's not just she's just a silly girl falling for something.
And also, she's a young girl. Like, there are so many retellings I've read where they're wonderful retellings, but I don't feel like any of them really let me feel that she is a young girl who, this has all kind of happened to her, and not in a solely like, she's a victim. Because she is a victim, obviously, of the things that happened to her, but she also is a fully rounded person. And I really loved getting to see that, because I think sometimes we don't get to see what it would have looked like to be a 17, 18-year-old girl in this situation, and how it would have felt, and who she becomes, and how she takes ownership of what she becomes as well.
Thank you. I wanted her to be flawed. She's flawed. We're all flawed, and I think we don't give enough young women grace, to be honest, having been one.
Same.
and I'm 32, so I mean, my teens are far away, but not super far away. I still remember them very vividly, but I just, looking back, even among my peers, we did not give each other grace. We were very harsh. A lot of the narrative turned to blaming the girl in these situations. And I think I wanted to sort of push back against that now that I'm old enough to see it.
Say goodbye to that messy drawer of hot hair tools and hello to the one. Introducing Shark Glam, Shark Beauty's new 5-in-1 multi-styler. Shark Glam offers wet or dry styling, air straightening, and glossing all with one tool. When air is not enough, Shark Glam has all hair types covered, using a breakthrough blend of hot air and ceramic technology. Shark Glam, one tool, endless styles, volume, shine, and bounce all day. Visit sharkbeauty.com to learn more.
Picture this, a curve in the road, a change in plans. Well, what do you say? With the all-new Audi Q3, the answer's always yes. Yes to adventure. Yes to escape. Yes to performance. Yes to comfort. Yes to right now. Because saying yes without hesitation, that's real luxury. The all-new Audi Q3, made for the yes life.
My day kicks off with a refreshing Celsius energy drink, then straight to the gym. Pre-K pickup, back home to meal prep. Time for my fire station shift. One more Celsius, gotta keep the lights on. When the 3-alarm hits, I'm ready. Celsius. Live, fit, go. Grab a cold, refreshing Celsius at your local retailer or locate now at Celsius.com.
So why do you think we keep retelling the story of Medusa? And what keeps this story so relevant to modern audiences today?
I think Medusa is a lightning rod of a character. I mean, Greek mythology is filled with them, right? There are so many who I really love, men and women and monsters. But I think the idea of a woman with snakes for hair is just in itself a striking image. I think the fact that there are different versions of her story, like I said, in some versions, she's already a monster and there's no dealings with Athena or Poseidon or anyone else. There's so much room for interpretation. It's like this big sandbox where anything goes. And there's a lot of freedom in that. So I feel like that's why we've seen so many interpretations of her story. And so many people can relate to her. How many people have been vilified or felt like they didn't get to tell their story? How many people have felt like the oddball in their family or someone who was maybe trapped or isolated and didn't have the chance to go seek whatever life they wanted. I think there are so many entry points to her story that people can connect to her in all these different ways.
Yeah, who among us hasn't been harassed by annoying men?
or falsely blamed. I mean, I know that the conversation around assault and harassment rightfully probably should, like, we see more women are statistically harassed and assaulted than men, but that's not to say that other people, men, non-binary people, can't also be assaulted, harmed, preyed upon, manipulated, put in a situation where there's an unfair power dynamic or an abuse of power. Sometimes it's sexual, sometimes it's just you have a boss at work who's making you do things that you know you shouldn't have to do, and you can't really fight back because of the dynamic there. So I think there are a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life who can see parts of themselves in Medi's story.
So, how do you see the story of Medusa, or how we tell the story of Medusa, as changing from the original mythology, which is, as we've said, has lots of different versions, into modern retellings? What do you think that the way we choose to retell the story tells us about ourselves?
I will say that I was careful not to read Medusa retellings while I was working on I, Medusa. I've read them in the past, and I've read some since pressing send, like the final version of I, Medusa. But I think, it's interesting what people focus on. There are some people who only spend a little bit of time, like, kind of focusing on who Medi or Medusa might have been before, and the majority of it's spent focusing on her being a quote unquote monster, but we see, maybe she's fighting for someone or it's justified in some other way. It was a little bit of a craft gamble to so much of the stories before she becomes a monster, but to what you said, I was personally more interested in who she was as a human being before she became a quote unquote monster, and what led up to the events, because everybody knows about the Medusa, the Gorgon, and a lot of people know about her death. And I didn't want to focus on her death or the latter half. I wanted to focus on the before and how easy it is to take young, ambitious men or women and warp them into something they never planned to be based on the things that happened to them, how easy it is. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think it's very personal. It's kind of what speaks to you and what matters to you and what you're intellectually curious about.
Yeah. I think for me, like, the story of Medusa really, a lot of retellings now are kind of trying to switch the narrative and show the story from the point of view of the victim or the point of view of who we consider to be the villain. So we're kind of inverting these narratives because so many of these Greek mythology stories are told from the point of view of propping up the patriarchy and strengthening the heroes of Athens and their renown, or whatever city-state is trying to bolster their reputation through telling this story. And now if we get the story not through Perseus and those who are rooting through Perseus, but through Medusa and what he did, so that this is now the villain, it's like this is giving more power to us, like to the people represented by that figure, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I think too, it depends on what inspires you. Because I say this, as you said that, I was thinking about, there's at least one retelling of Medusa, and I think it's just called Medusa, maybe, by Rosie Hewlett. I thought what she did, I read that version of Medusa after I'd completely finished with I, Medusa, because I'd heard such great things. And what she does with Perseus at the end of that version, I thought was really interesting, because it sort of inverts what we think about Medusa's relationship with Perseus. I chose to do something very different. I actually don't mention him on the page at all.
I love that so much. And I was like, I don't want to spoil it, but you don't mention it. And it's my favorite thing about, like, there's so many favorite things, but it's my favorite thing in reclaiming that part of the myth is he's never mentioned.
He's not mentioned by name. He appears, but we don't get his name. And that was another kind of gamble I've taken, or I took, because I know some people very much think of them as a pair, like a macabre pair, but a pair. But for me, in thinking about like Aaliyah Houghton and how she was a big touchstone and a big inspiration as a pop songstress who was preyed upon by a more powerful figure, and how in a lot of ways her legacy has been like permanently tied to his, I kind of wanted to push back and be a little more defiant and just not talk about Perseus. And I don't know, like I ended up liking that I didn't, but I know for some people they were like, I mean, I've been asked, like, does he appear in the book? Are you gonna show him? And I'm like, I don't know if I want to show the murderer of my main character on the page.
Well, that's it. Like, he's not a part of her story. He's the end of her story. And I've read a few interesting retellings about sort of like what happens when Medusa is turned into a monster and her immortal head and that kind of stuff, where we can see different things later on. But I really enjoyed the fact that he is the end of that story, and we wouldn't spend 2/3 of our life kind of thinking about how we're going to die or what's going to get us in the end, or potentially our murderer, whether that is a disease or a person, right? So it was nice to uncouple them and have a really great story about who she was, how she lived, the humanity in sort of someone who comes from an immortal family who's also being sort of moved about like a chess piece by other immortals, you know. And yeah, I just found it really refreshing. I haven't really seen that many takes on Medusa in that way. So I was like, please, more of this.
Because if you think about it, it really does make sense. Like the Medusa of the myths, probably, I don't recall that she had any kind of relationship to Perseus before Perseus just kind of showed up.
He does a home invasion and murders her. That's what he does.
While she's asleep, notably.
Yeah, because he needs this fancy wedding gift. Like that is literally, if I'm getting this right, it's the wedding gift one, right?
It's a challenge. Yeah. And actually, this is not even an imagine. You see this all the time when young people, I'm trying to say young people because this does happen to men too. When someone is horribly murdered, it's like there's more focus and interest in the person that murdered them than the person themselves. And that's always especially heartbreaking for the family, because here's this beautiful person who lived this wonderful life and had so much to give, and the focus is on the person who was only a footnote at the very end of their life. And so again, just trying to push back on that a little bit and what we focus on.
And saying that with my true crime hat on, I'm thinking of, you know, the Idaho 4 college kids who were murdered, or...
That's who came to mind.
Right? I appreciate when people don't say his name and instead try to focus on their stories. Because I know, like, my brain wants to make sense of why someone did something so horrible. But it doesn't mean that, like, that person's motivations are more important than the people who lived. What you've done here has been like, but this is a real life person who lived. And they had a real, full fictional life. And this is what that would have looked like before the murderer comes in and does what he does.
Thank you. As a writer, I never know, so thank you.
You're welcome. I also, when you were saying you don't read retellings, I'm working on a Dionysus retelling, and I'm like, I won't read anything about Dionysus, like nowhere near it, because I'm so scared it's going to influence something I'll do. But once it's done, I'm like, I can't wait to read, I think it's Hymn to Dionysus by Natasha Pulley. I think that's who wrote it. It's supposed to be really good, but I'm like, I have to stay away until I'm done.
Yeah, it's hard because you want to protect your creative integrity. But I mean, I do love Medusa, and I love reading about her and different stories. And it's so funny because as this book has made its way out in the world, as it, you know, advanced copies are out there, I've had readers tag me in songs that they think remind them of Medusa, or some songs even called Medusa. And I'm learning new songs and like new parts of her lore. And it's cool. It's like a little fandom of people who just love Medusa. So I love reading retellings and seeing artwork, people who reimagine her looking all sorts of different ways, or focus on her sisters. There's a great retelling called Medusa's Sisters, I believe. It goes through the POVs of Euryale, Steno, and I think Medusa, because we don't often talk about her sisters. It's usually just Medusa. So there's so many cool entry points with her.
We had on Natalie Haynes, and what I loved about her retelling was she had Medusa and then the sisters, and she reimagined Medusa growing up with two sisters who were only monstrous Gorgons, who didn't look like her, but monstrous to her in this instance was beautiful. That's what beauty was. And I loved this idea of like, okay, but what if you aren't around humans, or the humans you're around are predatory? So like, you see safety and beauty in what others would consider monstrous. And I thought that was a really, really well done, really interesting take.
Oh, and I mean, this book is, among other things, a story of sisterhood. And I mean, I'm an eldest sister. I'm an eldest daughter.
Same.
That's why we get along. And I thought, I mean, in early drafts of this story, I really got to play around with like, what would you do for your sister? And the answer is quite surprising, because I can easily, I have a younger sister, my baby sister. My baby sister is 27. But still, like, I'm like, I think I would probably do some monstrous things to protect my little sister and not really think twice about it, because that's what love does. Love can look monstrous when you are doing it in the name of protecting someone or people who you don't feel have protection or are cared about. And we see that in the book. We see Medi do things sometimes for right, sometimes for wrong, because in her mind, she's justifying it as, I'm doing this for people I love. And you can kind of, because you're in her mind, you can kind of follow along and be like, yeah, I get it. Like, this was bad, but I get it. Hopefully you feel that way.
Oh, I feel that way.
I feel like that's kind of the fun about writing morally ambiguous characters. Is that you can keep the audience on board when they're doing stuff that potentially is a little messed up, but it's just like, how can I make this so that, okay, this is a little messed up what this person is doing, but I am so on board. I don't know what I would have done differently.
You're like, I have no notes.
No, 10 out of 10, no notes.
And I think that's important too, because it also there's a certain level of humanity in thinking about, well, what would I do to protect someone that close to me and that I loved? And what does that mean about humans in general and the way in which we love, and how love can be both like a wonderful, encompassing, good thing and also lead us to do some of the worst things.
This is Jenny Williamson from Ancient History Fangirl, here to tell you about my upcoming scorching romance novel, Enemy of My Dreams. In the last days of the Roman Empire, a desperate princess and a brutal Gothic warlord forged a dangerous alliance. Julia, only daughter of the Emperor of Rome, lives a life of excess and freedom. But when her father dies and her teenage brother takes the throne, he will stop at nothing to seize control of both the empire and his wayward sister. And now Alaric of the Visigoths, a ferocious warrior who has battled Rome for years, has come to the capital to bargain for his homeland. Realizing how perilous her position is, Julia impulsively turns to Alaric, the empire's sworn enemy, and the one man who can make Rome tremble. Best-selling author Elodie Harper says, quote, "This is a hugely entertaining Roman world romantasy with a hilarious heroine and smoldering hero whose adventures in love and war are set against the backdrop of the last dangerous days of an ancient empire. Enemy of My Dreams is available wherever books are sold."
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Tap the banner to learn more and get a quote at USAA.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Subaru. Go further in a long-range Subaru hybrid with up to 597 miles per tank in the Crosstrek hybrid and up to 581 miles per tank in the Forester hybrid. Subaru. Love goes the extra mile. Visit Subaru.com/hybrid to learn more. Range based on EPA estimated combined fuel economy and a full tank of fuel. Actual mileage and range may vary.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
There are so many fascinating gods and goddesses who appear in this novel. Which one was your favorite to write?
I actually really enjoyed, there's different ways to say her name, but I say Keto, so Medusa's mother. And I'm going to try not to spoil, but like, first of all, not much is known about her. She's not one of those gods or goddesses that's really focused on. There aren't a lot of stories about her. I think Keto was my favorite because she looks in the beginning one way, and then as the story unfolds, you get a bit of her backstory and see that her story's also, like Medusa, more complicated than it appears at first. And this is the beauty of it, because there's not a lot known about her in the lore of Greek mythology. Like she's mentioned, but there's just not a lot. It left so much open ground to play with and be like, well, what is her story? Why is she so dysfunctional and so awful to Medi in the beginning? And then it just unravels as the story goes on. So I had a lot of fun writing her. I also had a lot of fun writing Amphitrite, Poseidon's wife. There's more about her in Greek mythology, but she's still a figure that there's just not. When we think about Medusa's story, I'm always surprised that no one mentions Amphitrite. I'm like, how would his wife have felt about him either having an affair, because there are versions where they have a romantic affair, and there are also versions where he assaults her. But I'm like, either way, how would Poseidon's wife feel about all of this? No one ever talks about her. And so, there are moments when Amphitrite and Medusa meet face to face, and I really enjoyed. I could picture very, very clearly how that would have looked. So it's a tie.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about Poseidon is when you talk about him to people who don't know a lot about mythology or who have like a very cursory understanding of Greek mythology, a lot of them are like, oh yeah, he wasn't that bad. He was all right. You know, he's the god of the sea. He had a good time. Dolphins, horses. And then you start like getting under the skin of like the mythology that involves him. And you're like, oh, he was just as bad as Zeus. Oh, okay. Maybe worse, you know?
And how women treat victims, how we treat each other. Like, so often when there's an affair, it's women being mad at the other woman and not being mad at the man who has done wrong to them both.
Absolutely. And it's how the patriarchy turns women against each other. Like in a lot of periods throughout history, it's not just ancient Greece, women were so dependent on men for their existence that you really couldn't be mad at the man. Like you were stuck having to be mad at other women. I mean, I think the story of Hera and Zeus kind of encapsulates that.
Oh yeah, she never goes after Zeus. It's always cursing and blight and just destroying all of these women who at some points weren't even aware who they were romantically involved with because Zeus wasn't being honest. But that's not convenient. So again, who benefits? Who benefits from Zeus, Poseidon, any of these gods getting to do what they want to do while the women around them are just pitted against each other, destroyed, sometimes cursed? It's worth asking, and it's worth talking about why mythology is set up that way. If you look at a family tree it's actually quite disturbing how many times Zeus appears. I've seen like YouTube videos.
The circle, the family tree is a circle, and it's always punching down. It's the violence is always about punching down, and we've had a lot of conversations before about like some of that. I know with Jenny Saint, with our friend Liv Albert, with a few people about why particularly goddesses always go after and punish usually the human victim. And it's because, obviously they're replicating what the stories of the society showing how women treat other women. But also, in the power dynamics of it, they're not able to go against their husbands or directly lash out. So what they do is they punish the victim over and over again. Because particularly in some of the retellings of Medusa that I've seen, Athena's not able to punish Poseidon for doing what he does, which is transgressing on raping one of his, in some of the stories, one of his priestesses. So in order to sort of get revenge in some ways, she has to take her revenge on the victim. And we see the same with Hera. And it's messed up, patriarchy sort of nonsense, but it is worth thinking about how that power works, because in this instance, you're looking at, gods, but you could just as easily be looking at kings and queens and how they treated other people within their realm.
Or even in the modern lens, I'm thinking about certain industries like in law firms, when you have a few women who are all competing for the top spot, when you have, I'll say, even in publishing, which there are a lot of women in publishing, there are fewer men, and the rules are definitely different. But it's all like, how do you gain power? How do you hold on to power? How do you lose power? I think too, one thing we see in the beginning of I, Medusa is that Medi has no power. She is the daughter of gods who are low, in the hierarchy of things anyway, and she sees like the different ways that her family members and the other gods around her are constantly like crabs in a barrel, pulling each other down, trying to get power here, trying to politic over here. And she finds her own method for having power in this world where it's been denied to her from the beginning. So you kind of, by the time she becomes a Gorgon and she's exerting her power, you're like, it's about time. She hasn't had anything.
Which god was the most surprising to write about?
Ooh. Maybe Poseidon? Maybe. Oh gosh, I had to really think about it. I'm going through all of the gods in my head. I think I think I'm gonna say Poseidon, because I thought that I wrote him in a way where, this was deliberate, like I wrote him where I wanted him to almost be sympathetic. Like there are moments when he seems to be genuinely nice to Medi and you're kind of rooting for him. And then, even though I know how the book's going to go and I know what's going to happen, I felt a little bit of heartbreak when he turned out to be who he really is, because, I guess it kind of goes to show that two things can be true. Somebody can be in your life and be positive, and be positive and be saying kind things that are uplifting and encouraging and making you a better person while also doing other things that are destructive. And that's really messy, but that's what I kind of want us to talk, us being everyone. I want us to talk more about how complicated this stuff can be. The world is not black and white. It's not easy to say, oh, well, they're just entirely evil or they're entirely good. Somebody who is a feminist, somebody who is, quote, pro women, who's done all these great things, made all these donations to great causes, been a champion, can also be, harmful to women. It's not either or, both can be true. And so even though I knew that's how I was going to write Poseidon, I still felt horrible when he inevitably shows his true colors. So that was surprising and also sort of heartbreaking for me as the writer.
This is why I love writing villains myself. Everybody is complicated. And the thing about people who are predators is that they often appear as really good and positive influences in somebody's life until they're not.
Yeah, I mean, we've all, you can pull out how long is a piece of string. We can think of any number of people who we thought were great. And then when we inevitably find out that they have been harmful for years, it's heartbreaking. And there's a moment where you have to reconcile, like, oh, I loved their music. Oh, I loved their book. Oh, I loved their TV show. How can this person who had a huge impact on my life and did all these good things, how can they also do all these terrible things? It hurts. It just genuinely hurts. And you have to sit with that and figure out how you're going to engage with that person and their work moving forward, whether you're going to cut it off completely or try to separate it or just pretend that's not real and keep going. It's complicated.
It is, and it's so personal because it's not just famous people. It's like, people you could be close to in your life. So yeah, I think it's an important thing to talk about, and I think it's an important thing to show in a very real way.
I think so. It's not easy. It should make you feel uncomfortable because it's not, just like you said, in your personal life, if you have a family member or a friend you've known a long time and then you learn something new about them, how do you reconcile the good with the bad or this new version of someone that you didn't know before? And it is hard and it is messy.
And how many of us have had that experience versus just, this person has been a mustache twirling villain the whole time? It's, less common.
So Poseidon and Athena are both villains in their own ways. What was it like writing about such well-known and even popular gods and digging into their darker motivations and stories?
Yeah, and in some versions, and I'm talking about across media, television shows, like books. I feel like sometimes Poseidon is like the cool surfer bro. He just wants to be at the beach. He just wants to be on the waves. All the serious stuff is for Zeus and Hades, and he's just kind of the chill brother. And when I think like of the old stories of Medusa and the versions where she's pursued by him, like it's this guy with a beard that just is also strangely ripped. And I'm like, but what if he was more moody and mysterious and actually considered attractive? Because we know as a society that we're more hesitant to condemn people that are good looking. It's super easy to condemn someone who looks, quote unquote, looks creepy or isn't attractive. But what if it's someone who actually is physically attractive, someone who actually is saying all the right things, someone who is making, in this case, Medi feel seen and appreciated and heard, and he's fighting for her and doing these things that make him seem like he's a good person? I think it's harder to say bad guy, good guy when we have characters like that.
Oh yeah, if you make him seductive at first, it's like, oh gosh, that's that's bad.
He lied to me, but it's okay because he lied for a reason and it's okay. Yeah, like now you're justifying other things.
All this is to say you did a very good job with character. Good Lord. Not that you need us to tell you that. Yeah, but sometimes it's nice to hear it.
Thank you.
One of the things about Athena that I always find fascinating is how little people actually know about her. Like they think they know who she is. And again, I love a female goddess of warfare and, strategy and statecraft and all the things that you're supposed to be like, yes, I like that empowerment. But the stories that we have that have come down to us are not stories where Athena behaves particularly well towards women. Like she's a great goddess for heroes, but not heroines. And with maybe one or two exceptions, I think Iphigenia she's not the worst in, maybe. But it's really tough. It's tough to sort of marry the two images, the popular one that we have and the actual one that we still have remnants of that have come down to us. And I was talking to my mom about it actually earlier today. And I was saying, like, these are the stories that we have. She could be very different. Like, there could be other stories that didn't come down to us because they weren't deemed worth preserving, and that's why we still have an affinity for her. Or we could also just still be, tools of the patriarchy.
It is tough to write characters that everybody has one particular impression of, and especially if you're trying to do something different, because in a way, that's what a retelling is there to do, is to put a new spin on a story, and you're trying to do that and trying to see different things in these characters, but at the same time, I guess you have to contend with what people expect in certain ways.
Oh, it's really scary. And the book's not out yet, so we'll see how it's received once it's truly out there. But I don't take for granted that these are very well known and well loved figures from Greek mythology, and I wanted to make sure that if I made a choice to change from canon or change from what most people know, that I was doing it for a reason and not just for vibes and aesthetic. People are very protective of Athena. I mean, I like Athena. Who doesn't love like a goddess of wisdom and warfare? Like Athena's always been one of my favorite goddesses. And so by pitting her as this villain in the story, like that was hard to do, because I don't want Athena to be evil. But I also felt like that was a really good opportunity to talk about how high achieving, clever, smart women sometimes are their own worst enemy. And again, it's patriarchy at play. So it's not just, but it's not as easy just to blame Athena and say, well, she's just a bad person. She lives in an environment where she has power, but she's had to fight for every scrap of it and is terrified of losing that power and will do anything to preserve her power. So it was scary, and it still is scary to kind of engage with these very well-known figures. But again, I hope Medusa has a canon, Poseidon has a canon, Athena has a canon, and I hope it just adds to the discussion about who they could have been. And it's a fight. I got stuck a few times because I was just petrified with, there are Hellenists who still worship some of these gods, and making sure I was respectful of them and making sure that I was aware of real history, but also not getting too caught up in the history, because that can lock you in and kind of make it creatively difficult. But also the fact that this is not just any reimagining of Medusa, but it's a reimagining where I'm writing about a Black girl, and there's a weight that I feel as a Black woman, making sure that I tell that story with authenticity. And if I'm talking about locks, respecting the lock community that has been around for thousands of years, there's a ton of pressure. So just doing a lot of research and bouncing ideas off and going back to the drawing board when it didn't feel right. It took 3 years.
This episode is brought to you by Peloton. Break through the busiest time of year with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. With real-time guidance and endless ways to move, you can personalize your workouts and train with confidence, helping you reach your goals in less time. Let yourself run, lift, sculpt, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Kayak gets my flight, hotel, and rental car right, so I can tune out travel advice that's just plain wrong.
Bro, Skycoin. Way better than points.
Never fly during a Scorpio full moon.
Just tell the manager you'll sue. Instant room upgrade.
Stop taking bad travel advice. Start comparing hundreds of sites with Kayak and get your trip right.
Bad advice? You talking to me?
Kayak. Got that right.
Protein is now at Starbucks, and it's never tasted so good. You can add protein cold foam to your favorite drink or try one of our new protein lattes or matcha. Try it today at Starbucks.
We love the relationship between Medi and her sisters. What was it like crafting their bonds and friendship, and how did Medusa's mortality play into their lives and motivations?
Well, when this book kind of came into my head, I knew pretty early on that sisterhood was something I wanted to touch on, because sisterhood is one of those things that's just incredibly human. Sisterhood is so flawed and so messy. And I feel like media portrays this weird and like perfect idea of sisterhood that actually irks me a lot as a sister. I always joke when you're reading a book and someone like up characters talking to their sibling and they're like, "Sister, where are you?" And I'm like, that author does not have siblings because I don't talk to my brother and sister like that.
I have two younger brothers, and one of my brothers, the only way we communicate is through trolling texts, where the other one has clearly gotten information about what I'm up to from my mother and then will text me something absolutely like off the rails, where I'm like, I know you know what's going on. And then I will just send him a gif of usually a wrestler or maybe an 80s or 90s pop icon doing something like "fuck you."
But you'll be there for them if there's a crisis, you're there. And like this book is dedicated to my younger sister. And it's funny because I made a whole video and everyone was like, "Oh, that's so sweet." And my sister cried when I guess I didn't tell her till the book was published, like printed. And it's very sweet. But also, like, my sister is notably shorter than my brother and I, and we had a long running bit for a long time that she was part garden gnome, and we kept it up for so long that my mom yelled at us and was like, "Stop calling your sister a gnome. It's rude."
I am the short one in the family. I'm also the oldest, so my sister towers above me. Like,
oh, it's worse.
Don't give her any ideas.
That dynamic is worse. Yeah, we're older and we're bigger. But like anyway, all that to say, like, and that's the beauty of brothers, sisters, like having siblings, people who grew up in the same household as you. It's messy. And I wanted to show that on the page, even though this book is pretty serious at times, or most of the time, like get those genuine humanizing moments where Meddy just gets to be with her sisters. Like, it's not too much of a spoiler, I think, but there's a moment. And I'm so grateful. My editor, Caitlin, is brilliant. She was like, "Let's have more moments with Meddy and her sisters." And there's a moment where Meddy's with one of her sisters and she's recalling teaching Meddy how to swim. And she's recalling how, like, obviously when you're learning how to swim and you're immortal and you know you won't drown, you learn how to swim differently. So they just throw Meddy into the water and they're like, "Figure it out." And then she starts drowning and they're like, "Oh, she's joking." Wait, no, she's not joking. We need to get her out the water. And it's like this little moment. It's this little moment where her sister reflects and she's like, "That was one of the moments I realized you weren't really quite like us, because you actually were quite fragile and we didn't understand or appreciate that you were fragile. And we knew we'd have to deal with you and treat you differently." And it kind of makes Meddy uncomfortable because it's a reminder that she is separate. But it's also, to me, this moment where, I mean, I think I have had those moments with my siblings when they were small and they fall and cry. And I'm like, "Oh, you're actually quite fragile. I need to be careful with you. You're not a doll. You're not a toy. You're a person." Those moments just mean a lot to me. And moments where they're all trying to protect each other in their own ways, and it doesn't always work out, because that's also very realistic. As eldest siblings, you watch your siblings do things and you're like, "I don't agree with this and I want to intervene, but also I can't, because you're your own human being, I'm my own human being, and we all kind of have to live out our lives." And that's very relatable, and it doesn't get easier as you get older.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like that moment where you're like, "Nobody asked my opinion on this."
Or that moment where I have to, between me and my middle brother, we have to bite our tongue when my youngest brother does something and just be like, "Okay, good luck. Call me in 2 weeks."
And resist the urge. Yep, resist the urge to get involved. Yep. I mean, you could be in your 30s, 20s, 40s, 60s, and I don't think that ever goes away, because you're just watching someone younger than you, older than you, live out their life, and you know them really well, and you can tell when something's a good idea or a bad idea, but you really do just have to let go and let them live their life.
And you need to hope maybe that this time they've grown as a person and it will be a good idea and they're not setting themselves up for failure.
Yeah, and I think you can imagine if you're immortal and you have a younger sibling who is extremely fragile, and you're just watching them go through life, and you're like, oh, I don't want you to do this. So her sisters have frustrations and they're concerned, and then she's concerned because she sees her sisters. They have different priorities because they're immortal, and she's like, "Wait, don't you want to live a quality life?" And they're like, "We're immortal. We don't really care about that." She's like, "What do you mean?" It's fraught.
It is fraught, and there's that protectiveness, which ties into their awareness of her mortality.
Siblinghood is complicated enough, and throw some immortality and some gods in there just for fun.
Just for fun, just to magnify everything.
So I was going to ask, after everyone has read this retelling, what mythology retellings, be they, Greco-Roman or whatever, outside of that pantheon, world mythology, do you recommend for others to sort of read if they've enjoyed this and they might want to read more about retellings?
Ooh, so it can't be Greco-Roman. Ooh.
It can be. It can be either or. I just want to give you, it can be anything. I just want to give you the diversity of like whatever, if you've read a good one that's non-Greco-Roman.
Yes. Okay. So I am like quickly checking to make sure and I always mess up how to say this book title, but I really love the book.
I can't wait to read the Aisha Kandisha that's coming out next year. I haven't read it yet, but
Yes, this one is, I believe it's Kaikaye by Vaishnavi Patel. And it is, I believe it's a retelling of, oh gosh, I'm going to mess this up. But Kaikaye was like, as a figure from, I believe, Hindu mythology that was pretty controversial. And this is kind of a fantasy retelling, really beautifully written. I just think Vaishnavi, her prose is really beautiful. So that's one of the ones I really enjoy. It's not an exact retelling, but Roshni Chakshi has a really cool retelling called The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. It's kind of a fairy tale-ish retelling. And the thing is, you don't realize it's a retelling until the end when you get in your, like, there's a twist and you're like, oh, it was this the whole time. Little Thieves by Margaret Owen is a loose retelling of The Goose Girl. So if you like Germanic folklore and mythology, that is like one of my favorite books, period. And it's young adult, but to me it reads like the world building is so ambitious. It could really be crossover. And I love, like, you talk about gods and creatures from lore. If you like Germanic inspired stuff, Little Thieves is amazing. And then in Greco-Roman, I mentioned Medusa by Rosie Hewlett. I think it came out a few years ago, maybe it was re-released this year. Natalie Haynes has Stoneblind. Another one that I read after My Medusa, just because I didn't want to mix it up, but really beautifully written. Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati is really beautiful. And actually, Babylonia by Costanza Casati as well. She's one of my favorite historical fiction writers.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me. This was really fun.
Where can people find you online?
I am most active on Instagram at Ayana Gray with a little underscore at the end. And I'm also, I have a newsletter through Substack that you can find the links to everywhere. And my website is just ayanagray.com.
Awesome. We will put links to that in our show notes so people can find you. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so phenomenal. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you whenever we see you next.
Hi, I'm Cassidy.
And I'm April, and together we are fashion historians, friends, and co-hosts of Dress, the History of Fashion, a podcast about why the clothes we wear matter throughout history and around the world.
From the cultural and societal to the personal and often political, with each episode we explore the multitude of meanings quite literally sewn into the clothes we wear.
Please join us in unraveling the hidden histories residing in your closet. New episodes are available on Wednesdays, and our Dressed Classic episodes re-air each Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your favorite shows.